And welcome back to episode number 60. A nice flat 60 here today. Two of your co-hosts, Zach's out with family right now. It's his dad's birthday, I think, tonight. And he prioritizes his family apparently over this podcast, so we're going to have to talk about that. But back as usual, McAtor here with Benny Ballgame Dearth. And special guest tonight, from 98.5 from Section 10, Tyler Milliken. Tyler, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I can't complain. I was just talking to you guys about my fears of balding, so I feel like we have a connection already. You guys have seen my insecure side, so let's talk some ball. That should be even easier.
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, let's just jump right into it. We got Boston Red Sox. Obviously, we saw Garrett Crochet sign, what is this, about 2 weeks ago now? Coming up on 2 weeks. Where are we? How are you guys feeling on this offseason now in terms of they got that starting pitcher, probably the biggest hurdle that they needed to make and get over this offseason? How are you feeling the remaining offseason? What do you think they need to do and, to get back into that playoff hunt?
Yeah, I think getting Garrett Crochet, right? Like you finally found the top of the rotation young ace that you haven't had. And really the guy I think who matches up perfectly with what your competitive window is, right? What you're kind of hoping to build with the likes of Marcelo Meyer, Christian Campbell, and Roman Anthony. But that high was crazy. I think everybody was, freaking out in a positive way for a good reason. You hadn't had a trade that felt that good and that exciting since the Chris Sale trade. And obviously there's different levels to it. When you got Chris Sale, this was a guy who was on a Hall of Fame track, right? When we're talking Garrett Crochet, it's a guy who's done it for 1 year. But when you talk Garrett Crochet, it's a guy who had the best K per nine of any starter with over 100 innings last year. When you're talking top 5 in FIP, right? The guys ahead of him are Chris Sale, Paul Skeens, Blake Snell. Like it is some of the truly nastiest stuff in all of baseball. And obviously the extension is going to factor in there, but it was a deal I was comfortable making. I think where most people are at though right now, and part of it I think is the rumors that came out that night as well. Like 3 hours later, you're hearing Red Sox, Mariners, right? Something's cooking there. They're engaged. You're like, are we about to get 48 hours where they take care of 80% of their offseason? But things have really quieted it down. But I think everyone's really waiting for not only a little bit more starting rotation help, but where is that right-handed bat going to fit in, especially with Tyler O'Neill heading to the Orioles?
Absolutely, Ben. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of reiterate the point and take it one step further. I think it was easily the biggest news, trade or free agent signing, that we had in a handful of years. I mean, you look back, Tyler O'Neill.
In terms of the players coming to us.
Yeah, positive.
Yeah. Obviously, who's Juan Soto anyway? But yeah, so I mean, biggest Red Sox news in a while, trade or acquisition, or free agent signing. I mean, you could make the argument that like Tyler O'Neill was their biggest free agent signing prior to today or last week. And so, super excited. I'm a big pitching guy. He certainly fits the mold. The Chris Sale trade brought a lot. There was some concerns, I think. A guy with his frame and his build with that kind of miles on his arm, you weren't really sure what you were going to get. I mean, we got everything we could have hoped for. You look back, hindsight is 2020, and in that moment it was we traded Yoan Moncada, number one prospect in baseball. You trade Michael Kopech, who you thought could possibly be a middle of the rotation guy. He's obviously a bullpen arm, helped the Dodgers last year. I actually kind of forget who the other two guys were in that deal. But you look back at it, and the Red Sox clearly won that trade. Moncada hasn't done anything. Like, Kopech is decent, right? But, you hope that you kind of get something similar with the Garrett Crochet deal, that we look back and we go, okay, we gave up 2 top prospects, but at the same time, we kind of won that trade. The sky's the limit with Crochet. Super excited. But Tyler, like you said, is, still looking for what's next. Whether it's, trading or signing another pitcher, you can't have enough of that. And then, of course, with all the rumors flying, what are they going to do to, figure out the right-handed bat situation? Are they bringing in, an Arenado or a Bregman and moving Devers off a third? Do they bring in somebody to play left? So it'll be nice to get that news. But it's really good to feel like they're at least making the moves. But and kind of I was listening to Section 10 earlier today, like the high's kind of worn off at this point. It's been a week, but it's like, okay, like what's next? Like this hopefully isn't the end of the offseason, because there's certainly some more holes to fill. And, I think that, if they make the moves they need to, like, this is on paper, I would say a low 90s team if they can add a legitimate bat and another arm in the rotation.
Yeah. So, like, to go back to the one thing on the Crochet trade that I want to, bring up is, for as much as we look at that Sale trade and say, hey, those guys ended up being shit, it doesn't, for the Crochet trade, to me, it doesn't really matter too much what they end up being. Like, if Teal ends up being a good catcher and Montgomery ends up being a good outfielder and Meadroth brings up into the majors and is, God, I loved his bat in the minors, but
OBP King.
Yeah, it really, to me, just matters what Crochet brings to the Sox. If those guys end up being studs on Chicago, good for them. Like, they identified the right guys and it pans out for them. But as long as Crochet ends up being what we hope he is, and that is I don't want to say he has to be an ace, but he has to be at least a top two, at least a number 2 at the bare minimum. And then in terms of the offseason, I think the way I've been kind of perceiving it now the last week or so is I think Breslow is ready to go on a handful of moves that he's ready. He has it laid out. But between everybody else, like, Burns is trying to maximize his money. Bregman's trying to maximize his money. Like, could Breslow just go over the top and make a ridiculous offer to one of these guys? Sure. But he's also being smart as a general manager and trying to play it the right way. And he's ready to go, but it's just the MLB offseason as a whole is the most incredibly frustrating thing out there.
Yeah. I think there is this pull for some people, and I think it's understandable. They want to see the Red Sox set the market to some degree with the financial flexibility they have, because they don't want to get left holding the bag. You don't want to get in this position you've been in, whether you want to name, and it's been on a smaller scale like a Zach Eflin or wherever it may be, but it sucks to finish second or third kind of regularly. And you've done that to the Dodgers multiple times the last couple of years. But I think for where the Red Sox are right now, and you're talking like Corbin Burns, to me, and sometimes I think the simplest answer really is the right answer. And I would be willing to jump on Corbin Burns, because the reason he's sitting here right now with the Blue Jays and the Giants, and I know Jeff Passan put the Orioles in that conversation today. I'm sorry. I have no faith in that.
No.
And Mike Elias putting all that money on the table. Ownership, they probably would be willing to, but I don't think that front office believes in investing in a pitcher at 30 years old, who's going to get, call it 8 years, 240 million or whatever it may be. But I do think when you have about 50 million before that first CBT threshold, if you're able to go get Corbin Burns, he complements so much, I think, some of what Garrett Crochet doesn't have right now in terms of that ability to be a 200-inning workhorse who's done it year in and year out. You immediately pair Corbin Burns and Garrett Crochet together at the top of that rotation. You have a rotation, I think, overall that can compete with anyone in baseball. You're immediately seen as one of the winners of the offseason. And I don't think it's all about being that team that gets that praise, but I think Corbin Burns is the easiest solution instead of, seemingly trading assets and getting uncomfortable, even for, in some ways, someone like Luis Castillo, who, you trade for Luis Castillo, you're picking up $24 million on the books for the next 3 seasons. It's a vesting option after that. People have talked about it. I've hammered it on Twitter, the home road splits. Like, he is a totally different guy on the road, and there's been a lot of regression multiple years in a row now. Lefties are absolutely teeing off on him. The velocity's down. The home runs per 9. I can't imagine taking him out of, Seattle, T-Mobile, where in terms of park factor, it's the best pitching environment in baseball. Now you're telling him to go to Fenway Park. I feel like there's going to be some significant regression there. And that's why I think there's the disconnect with where the Red Sox and Mariners are at, where, the Red Sox say, hey, we're willing to trade Tristan Casas, for Brian Wu or Bryce Miller, which even to me made me a little uncomfortable. But the Mariners are sitting here and saying, Luis Castillo, is that more the conversation? That's more the Casas tier. And even then, they don't see him as the ideal fit for what they're looking for. I think Corbin Burns is such an easy and simple solution. But we know where John Henry and Ken Rosenthal had this report over the last couple of days. They don't believe in giving out these kind of contracts to older pitchers and pitchers overall. This is kind of where you get uncomfortable. If that's the case, then go pivot. If you don't want to hand out 7 years to Alex Bregman, Teoscar Hernandez is sitting there for 3 at 66, and you're not shaking up your team in a significant way to do that.
Yeah. So I had a question on Burns though. So my my slight hesitation with Burns, and I know it's not a direct correlation, but like if you look at Patrick Corbin from a handful of years ago, there you saw a steady decline in his fastball velocity, and it directly correlated to. I mean, like he kind of cliffed a little, in my opinion, right? He was good. Like you knew what you were going to get, and then you started to notice like the fastball velocity was down to 93, 94, then it was 91, 92, and with that came and I know record is way overblown when it comes to pitching, but you're talking sub 500 record, balloon DRA, the hits, the whips up. It just goes downhill from there. Burns's K rate has been on a decline for 2 or 3 years now. I know that, at least from my perspective, I know you're big into the peripheral stats.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the K rate declining being indicative of not necessarily to the level of Patrick Corbin, because that was a velo issue more than anything? Burns' velo is still there. Do you see a drop in the K rate as a cause for concern, or has he just been a victim of circumstance being on 2 teams in the last 2 years?
I'd call it an orange flag because for me, you start to dive deeper into a lot of it. His velocity was actually up quite a bit from 2023 into 2024, over a mile plus. And what you saw was the ground ball rate spike in a pretty dramatic way. I think to me, some of that is that a guy who's starting to learn what it takes to pitch into his 30s. That hey, I may not always be this guy that's going to outstuff you. Sometimes I want to go deeper into a game. I want to go 7 innings and be able to be that kind of workhorse. And credit to the Orioles, right? You saw at the end of the year, they reshaped his cutter in a pretty significant way, and the K rate started to go up. I also don't think it's a small factor that Chris Holt, who has been their director of pitching over in Baltimore, is now your bullpen coach here. So you have someone in the organization that has that relationship with Corbin Burns. But yeah, the K per 9 doesn't freak me out in a significant way because I watched him last year, still one of the best pitchers in all of baseball, put his nuts on the table in the postseason as well. I think you pair him with someone like Andrew Bailey. Yeah, are the last couple of years of that contract going to be not the greatest? Of course, that's what happens when you pay a 30-year-old pitcher. There's not many guys at 30 who are going to be the same at 35, but that's where you're looking for some of the certainty that I think the Red Sox lack in their rotation, and getting that certainty for the next 3 or 4 years, I think not only makes that competitive window open up quicker, but gives you, more shots at the top as, the young core, especially with Campbell and Anthony, as they get their feet underneath them. Because say what you will about this season, I don't know if Meyer's still going to be here, but let's talk as if he is. You have 3 guys who are expected to be main fixtures on this team that are going to be joining the lineup in the next 6 months. That's a major thing to go through for any team. It doesn't matter what kind of talent you have. Like, those are real growing pains for a team that has yet to, make a postseason run with what that core is on that team right now.
Yeah. The biggest thing, and that you kind of just brought it up for me, that like 2 weeks ago, I was very high on Castillo. The idea of Castillo, bringing him here. First of all, Seattle
thing too, mentor.
Well, so my biggest issue, Seattle should have traded him as quick as possible. Right now, they are running into a situation where it's, well, why would I give you a valuable asset for Castillo when I can sign even a Walker Buehler or a Jack Flaherty? Like, why am I going to give you a valuable asset when I don't need to? They should have dumped him as soon as the offseason picked up and just took the best value that they could get, before free agency really took off. In terms of, I'm personally kind of out on Castillo now, just based off the price. Now, if they're willing to take on, let's say, Yoshida's contract or something like that, then, we're in a conversation. But I'm out on giving them anything of real value for someone like him. I'm more focused on the free agent market with Burns. I'm all in on it. Obviously, the biggest thing is, what are you going to pay him? How many years, stuff like that. I proposed the idea, and actually Ken Rosenthal kind of brought up the concept of maybe he would do it, is give him a 3-year, $45 million a year deal.
You're talking about Burns?
Yeah, Burns. I think it's 3 years, $135, right? And then give him 3 player options after that, where it's like 30 million, and 25 million.
It's like a more advanced version of the Blake Snell contract from a year ago, essentially.
Yeah. Exactly. So this, in his mind, it says, hey, I'm getting 45 million a year, which is way above what he will probably get on the market. He's probably looking at mid-30s at the most. So he would make it at least 30 million more over the first 3 years than he would on a long-term contract. And then if he's still pitching very well at 33 years old, he can hit the market again and get a 4 or 5 year deal at big money. If he's, he's a mid-3 guy now, or we hope not worse than that. But, at 33, if he's a mid-3 ERA guy and he doesn't feel like his market's going to be that great, he can opt in for one more year. And then it gives him that structure where in my opinion, that makes a ton of sense for both sides. And I had a few people bitch that it's unrealistic. And I'm like, why is it unrealistic? They're crying about the AAV. And I'm like, you know what? Like, you got to do sometimes what you have to do to get the player there. So if that means I have no problem if Corbin Burns is a stud for the next 3 years, no one's going to be like, oh, you know what? But we were paying him $45 million. So, it wasn't worth it. Like, if he's a stud, no one's going to give a shit about $45 million a year.
No, and that's where like the financial muscle comes into it. And this is like a weird spot because you get the sports radio side that's like, the Red Sox don't fucking spend money, they're cheap, and like it's immediately going that route, right? Like if you would trade for Luis Castillo today and threw $24 million on the books, it's like, all right, well, you have another $25 million and you're already at the CBT threshold. You talk Corbin Burns, even you gave him 45, you're right there. Like it takes a move or two. Say they sign Teoscar and go get Jeff Hoffman, right? Like you're gonna be right there. It's only a couple moves before you get into that vicinity again. But yeah, I think for Corbin Burns as a whole, as you're saying, you get to 32, 33. Blake Snell just got 182 million. Like he was going into his age 33 season and didn't even
that into like we hear Henry doesn't like, or he's might be scared of giving out these long-term contracts. In this instinct is the worst case scenario is you're stuck for 6 years, but you're only paying him, 30, and then maybe 25 in those final 3 years that he's opting into.
And look at the way pitching is, like with the pricing, man, it's going up and up. You give any contract 2 or 3 years and it immediately looks, oh, that's actually quite reasonable or cheap in comparative to what other guys are
we see that in football more than anything.
Of course. Like you talk even Garrett Crochet, and this is why the extension conversation is so big. If he comes here and he pitches anything like he did last season over the next 2 seasons, do you know how much money he would get? He is going to be.
It would be 300 plus easily
without even thinking. Like that's the starting point, and it could go even higher at 28 years old. So, like you kind of got to pick your spots here, and that's why it seems like the perfect spot. If you're willing to pay Max Fried, who wasn't a big strikeout guy either, right? Someone who was pretty ground ball dependent, 7 years, 190. I would at least hope you're pretty deep into these conversations with Corbin Burns. I don't see why you'd be so willing to go that route, but not willing to at least, push the Giants and Blue Jays here who aren't willing to close the deal for whatever reason. And maybe it is Scott Boras just saying, we're going to wait it out till teams get desperate. But this feels like a spot where, man, the big dogs have beaten you quite a bit the last couple of years. There's no big dog here looming. It's you and then the Blue Jays and Giants who have to beg people to sign long-term contracts with them.
Yeah, just go out and get them. Canada. And what's interesting, and I don't know if I'm looking too far into this. So the first 3 years of Corbin Burns, he was a relief pitcher. So he didn't really start stretching out until 2021. I mean, granted, he made 9 starts in 2020. I mean, take that with a grain of salt. That's the COVID shortened year. Do you think starting out as a reliever has any impact on his long-term health? Where he's only really been a full-time starter for 4 seasons. So yes, while he's 30, he only has what? Let's see. What am I looking at here? He only has
900 innings going to his age 30 season.
But right, and so you factor in and you look at 120 of those innings were relief innings spread out over 3 seasons. Like, do you think that factors in much at all?
That should be a positive, in my opinion. Right. It's like you don't have ridiculous mileage there. And that's why, to me, it's like if you don't have the velocity dropping in any significant way, the K/9 drop, but that sounds more like he needs mechanics or stuff tweaked than anything. It doesn't sound like, oh, he's not throwing the same shit he was throwing when he was in his, mid to late 20s.
Yeah. Whereas, like, if you want to compare him to Chris Sale, because they're going to compare him to Chris Sale. In the years leading up to the Red Sox trade, so the Red Sox traded for him prior to 2017, he had 192, 214, 174, 208, 226 innings, all before he put on a Red Sox uniform.
Oh, they were working him like a dog, man.
And then he throws 214 in 2017, and then he wasn't the same since. He was burnt out at that point. So, tying it back into Crochet, and Matt, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder for a future question. if you're GM Tyler Milliken of the Boston Red Sox, what is your realistic offer to Garrett Crochet today on an extension to get it in so that if he does have a repeat of 2024 in 2025, and you're trying to avoid the $300 to $400 million extension he'll want a year from now?
Yeah, so I do think it's important to highlight. A lot of people were like floating that he was like a Scott Boras guy. It's like, no, he's not. He's not a Scott Boras guy. So erase that part of the equation here. And as you know, you've looked for Garrett Crochet. He's been open to signing an extension. It was reported going into trade season this offseason that he was willing to. We knew he was discussing it with the White Sox as well. But to me, I think where you jump in here is somewhere around like 25 to 26 million. Try to buy out 5 or 6 of those free agent years, get yourself around to 32, 33. So you buy out that entire prime. It's not going to come cheap. Like that's what it is at the end of the day. Cause Garrett Crochet is going to realize, despite his injury history, man, I am so close to getting such a ridiculous contract. So you're trying to balance out the risk and the reward here for him. I think you meet him in the middle. We're talking roughly like 300 million if everything went right for him the next 2 years and he hit free agency. Yeah. I'm probably getting closer to 150, 160 million, but I would put escalators in it like crazy where, hey man, you show up and you become that guy, you're getting, ace money. You don't have anything to worry about. We may even throw a couple team options at the very end of it that are very, money friendly on your end. But that would be where I start to push the conversation. Cause I think the minute he shows up to spring training and we start seeing him, pushing 97, 98, like this guy, what he did last year, he wasn't even throwing a cutter at the start of last season. He wasn't throwing that sinker at the end of the year that became one of his best pitches by the end of the year. He did this all on the go, reshaping his sweeper. Like to have that kind of pitchability and to pair him with Andrew Bailey, yeah, I think you're looking at something like adding on 5 years at roughly, 25 to 27 million AAV.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean for me, it's obviously what is he looking for? Does he want something where it's a long-term contract and he's going to basically be with the Red Sox for the next 8 to 10 years? Or is he looking for something that is, buy out the next 2 years of arbitration and then maybe 2 more or something like that? I think the middle ground is kind of what you said. I think they can give him he'll probably want 4 years guaranteed where he could become a free agent at 30.
Get that opt-out in there.
Yeah, but we can you either put an opt-out or you do team options, and the team options have to be $35-40 million a year, something like that. And if not, there's a buyout or some, there's some type of clause, all different escalators and situations like that. That's how I think it's going to play out, because I think he's going to want to, he wants to guarantee himself some money, but I think he would be kind of silly to sign an 8-year deal where the money, it just ends up being mid to low 20s AAV, something like that, where if he bets on himself, even just a little bit, he could be making 4 years from now, he could be making $35-40 million a year minimum if he really is a true ace. Yep. So that's where I kind of see it. I don't expect a very long-term deal, but now that they got him, they have to lock him up. They have to say, we're bringing him in here. He's here. We're bringing him into the top of the rotation, and he needs to be here for the next 4 or 5 years, and guaranteeing the fan base that.
Yeah, if your entire MO is hey, we're not cheap, but we're willing to jump in when it's these premium talents in their mid-20s, Juan Soto, Yoshinobu Yamamoto a year ago, you put $300 million down on the table. And, I would have been willing to go even beyond that at the time. Obviously, the Roki Sasaki conversation is a little different, but just putting Garrett Crochet into that, it's yeah, you're getting an elite talent in his mid-20s. That is such a rare thing to have. You have no excuse. All your reservations you have about paying a Corbin Burns should be every reason then that you're willing to go and overextend for Garrett Crochet. Your logic doesn't add up if you're somehow, looking at Corbin Burns that way and then flinching at Garrett Crochet. It should be the opposite. If you're so uncomfortable with, Burns, you should be extremely comfortable with Crochet.
And given what they gave up, you gave up a top 3 prospect in Teal, and Braden Montgomery is a number 1 prospect on 20 other teams in baseball. If you're willing to give up that kind of talent, and I know you, Tyler, you said this on your show, if you're willing to invest that kind of potential talent, you need to go then say, okay, we gave up A, and we believe in you because of that. So here's the money that we think you're worth because we want to keep you here. I'll be really disappointed if they gave up those 4 guys and somehow Garrett Crochet is hitting free agency 2 years from now, and you're balking at a $400 million contract because you didn't figure out a way to strike a deal after you traded for him.
Yeah, show me the conviction. If you have so much conviction to make a trade like that, you should have that conviction to go pay that guy. If you trust the way you look at everything underneath the hood and just how your pitching scouts things, and you want to flex, right? Hey, listen, I know we didn't pay anyone last year, but look at the guys who we did, talk with and we were serious about. It was Jack Flaherty. You saw the year he had. Shoto Imanaga. You saw that. Seth Lugo. We were in that to the end. Well, cool. You trust your evaluation so much. That same evaluation led you to this trade for Garrett Crochet. So go act like it. Throw the fucking money on the table. Get it done.
Yeah, I'm confident that it will happen.
Me too.
I think Crochet is highly motivated to wanting to get guaranteed money on the table too. But it's just obviously going to be about finding that middle ground.
I'll also add, I think Craig Breslow, and I didn't think he had to do this, saying he's our ace. We believe he's a number 1 starting pitcher. That is quite a title. Even if you believe in this guy with that package you gave up, immediately giving him that before throwing a single pitch there, I think is an acknowledgement and saying, this is what we expect you to be. This is how you should carry yourself. You are the guy around here. There's certain money in taking care of someone that comes along with that kind of stuff. And I think that factors in. I didn't expect Craig Breslow to drop a line like that because those are expectations for a guy who, while he threw, just below 150 innings last year, we've never seen him carry the full starter workload, across an entire season.
Yeah, absolutely. Where are you on the right-handed bat? Obviously, we've seen Bregman, a lot of talk there. We've seen Arenado being floated around, Teoscar Hernandez being floated around, maybe even Santander.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your preference and how you feeling and what you expect them to do?
Yeah, so I entered this offseason and I was very on the record. I was pretty uncomfortable with a lot of the third base options, whether you wanted to talk, Willy Adames moving over there, giving Alex Bregman that money. Now Nolan Arenado's come in, and I have a lot of reservations overall with him and where his kind of bat has gone. But where I kind of found a sweet spot, and I don't trust the Red Sox on this front as they talk about Alex Bregman being their second baseman. But I do think if you brought Bregman at second base, why I kind of buy into that idea and why I've been hesitant to those others is what happens to Tristan Casas and the whole Rafael Devers situation as well. I think Tristan Casas is a true premium elite young talent in this game. I think what he did in the second half of 2023 somehow is underrated and not spoken about enough when you become a top 10 hitter in the sport as a rookie for that significant amount of a stretch where, the Red Sox were on their knees begging last March to get an extension done. And Casas sitting there saying, hey, I know what I'm worth. To me, in a lot of ways, I didn't believe it was worth bringing in a Bregman or a Adames or an Arenado if it meant moving Devers to first base, which I'll tip my cap to Lou Merlone, guy who knows ball like anybody. He's great at what he does. He believes Devers can play first base. I have reservations about it. I think you talk about a guy in Devers who has a hard time moving on from errors in the field. You look at his errors last season with 12, 9 of them were fielding. With his body type, I'm scared to picture him stretching and doing different stuff out there like that. Like, say what you want about Casas being a butcher in the field at times. That man can stretch. Like, he will get there. If there's one great part of his game, it is his ability to, make a bad throw and kind of get the out at first
Premium
base.
stretcher.
Big stretcher.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, in a lot of ways, I wasn't super interested in the idea of moving Tristan Casas. I wasn't into the idea of Rafael Devers playing first base. And I think with Alex Bregman as a whole, you're talking 4 years in a row now where the OPS plus has gone down. His walk rate essentially was cut in half this past year. But like Arenado, they carry very similar characteristics. They don't strike out at all. The whiff percentage is super low, and you get Gold Glove caliber defense. The reason why I was into the idea of Bregman coming here now a little bit more and putting him at second base, and I still think the end of that contract is going to be rather rough, is you would allow Devers not to have this issue where his agent has now spoke out multiple times about him playing third base here. As much as people want to act like that's, oh, he'll move, who cares? Why is that camp continuing to push out that message? Why are the Red Sox so sensitive to even address the issue? I think speaks to how delicate that situation is. I'm into the idea of bringing Bregman here potentially on a high AAV deal for 5 years. And I'd be willing to push a little even above $30 million to get it done. But if you could keep Devers at third for one more year, put Bregman at second, I still think you're improving your defense. You let Casas rebuild his value for a year at first base. If you want to go get Vladdy next year, be my fucking guest. I love Tristan Casas. I want him here, but if that's your plan, this still allows it to happen. I would move Ceddanne Rafael into a utility role because I don't believe, where his bat is at. I am not a major fan of it overall, as great as the defense is. And I would use left field as a spot for Christian Campbell to potentially break in. Jarren Duran, who was an elite defender in center field last year, does not get talked about enough. And then right field, depending on what happens with Roman Anthony and Wilyer Abreu. If Abreu gets shipped out, I'm more than comfortable having Roman Anthony as my opening day right fielder.
Fair enough, Ben. Where are you at? Good.
So I'm super torn. I liked the idea of figuring out a way to bring in a right-handed bat. I was definitely in the Bregman camp more so than the Arenado camp. But when you holistically, it's a lot cheaper of a contract with Arenado. Yes, he's older. I know Bregman's not as big as Arenado. I don't know how much his build would indicate he would break down. And that's just a gut instinct type of deal. He's not small by any stretch, but
sounds like me talking to you last night and you arguing against this exact argument.
Well, oppositional defiance. I would be equally happy with either direction. If you're going to trade for Arenado, I think you have to figure out a way to get them to take on Yoshida. Because if you're bringing in Arenado, you're moving Devers off a third, and whatever you want to do with him. I mean, in an ideal world, he would accept going to DH. Now, this is my ideal world, whether he would want to or not. You bring in an Arenado or a Bregman because you immediately upgrade the defense, and as long as Trevor Story is healthy, which is a big if and can't be guaranteed, you have arguably the best defense on the left side of the infield in baseball, as long as those two guys are on the field. And again, if Devers is amenable to playing DH, great. That makes things a lot easier because now, as long as he doesn't want to play the field, you don't have to move Casas, because in an ideal world, he stays at first. You have an upgraded defense at third, and Devers can just worry about hitting 35 bombs a year. I think I'd be fine with Bregman. They certainly have the money. To a fault, I guess. I've certainly hammered home in conversations with Matt about just spending money. They have money. Go spend it on the talent that you need to upgrade the roster. I think because you get more years out of it, I lean a little bit more towards pay Bregman. 5 or 6 years at low 30s a year to get it done. But I don't think I'd be disappointed if it was, we're trading Yoshida and whatever else in order to get Arenado to come play third. Like you said, Devers had 9 out of 12 errors fielding last year. I think for his career, it's more of a 50-50 split. I was looking it up last night. I think it's like 71 fielding, 66 throwing errors for his career, somewhere in that ballpark. But again, Bregman or Arenado, fine. But I mean, you still got to figure out what you're going to do in left field.
Yeah, I think the Arenado side of it too. It's like the reason why it's somewhat attractive is if you're scared of that Bregman contract, looking at what that Nolan Arenado, rejection trade yesterday was. What the problem is, the Cardinals are looking to offload salary. They weren't willing to eat that much, only right. 15 over 3 years, $5 million a season. But still at that point, it's 3 years, 45. I think where I sit back and that makes me a little uncomfortable is I don't know if there's enough production there for Nolan Arenado to bring on the changes that would come with it. Because if you are bringing him into this mix, and let's say in this world, you find a way to move Yoshida, whether it's that deal or another deal, right? And Devers says, I'll go play DH. You're also creating a little bit of an interesting situation with Marcelo Meyer as well, where, if Marcelo Meyer is going to factor into this thing this season, right, you would be having the same conversation about having to move Devers. Trevor Story is playing shortstop for the next 3 seasons. That is his ability. He plays an elite defensive shortstop. Cool. So if Christian Campbell, more likely than not, is going to call second base home in this Nolan Arenado situation, Marcelo Meyer would be, you either need to deal him or you need to do something with him because all of a sudden there's not a clear lane for him anymore at the big league level.
Yeah. Do you have reservations about Meyer at second?
I don't. And that's where maybe if you're still willing to go the Ceddanne Rafaela utility route, you could say, all right, put Campbell in left, put Meyer at second and play it out that way. I think he could play the position. I do believe, though, if he's going to end up at somewhere besides short, third always seemed the most likely spot.
Yeah.
But I think that's where you get into it. At least with Alex Bregman, you're still getting in a bat that's well above average, plus that Gold Glove defense, plus the leadership, which I think they lack. They need that kind of hard ass Dustin Pedroia guy in there to kind of give them that postseason, swagger. Like Cora's kind of been out here and feels like when he has to be the leader of the team, that's very problematic for a manager. Jarren Duran this past year, they were forcing him to kind of grow into that role, and you saw the bumps. And I think he's going to be a fine leader in the years to come, but he's not quite there. Alex Bregman brings a different pedigree. There's more reason to shake up for a guy like Alex Bregman than I feel like Nolan Arenado at this point. But there's less risk there. So it's like you're constantly playing that balancing game back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for Bregman, for me, like, and Ben and I have gone back and forth on this, I'm not going over 5 years. Look, I like the guy. I would love him here. I would be thrilled if they, pay up and sign him because he's a good player. He's a good locker room guy. He's a good leader, and he mashes at Fenway. Like, that's an understatement. But I don't see him aging well whatsoever. And also, in going into that, deeper into this conversation, the more I've thought about it, I don't want to create so many blocks in the road for guys like Christian Campbell and Marcel Mayer. You add someone like Bregman. Let's say he comes here and this year he plays second base. And, down the road maybe you throw Devers at DH and Bregman goes over or something like that. But you immediately throw a blockade in front of Mayer and Campbell coming up. So you ask yourself, what are they going to do there if you sign someone like Bregman? To me, I think the obvious answer is sign Teoscar Hernandez.
And that's what I keep coming back to, where it's like 366. It feels like the perfect middle ground of not taking that risk, not shaking the roster up to a ridiculous point, but also getting the production you really badly need. And another dude who loves Fenway and kills it there.
Exactly. He wants to come here. Like he has been very vocal, whether it's through leaks or his own words, that he is interested in coming to Fenway. The reason I want him here, obviously he's a right-handed bat that can, hit for power. He strikes out a good amount, but
28% of the time, I believe.
Yeah, it's certainly not ideal there, but he's the power middle of the order bat that you can add, and it doesn't create a blockade in the middle of the infield for these young guys. I think Anthony can easily slide into right field. No matter, I love Abreu. I'm a huge Abreu fan, but we need to be realistic in terms of that. That's Anthony's spot for the future, for the next decade, hopefully. And then you go and you put Campbell at second. And, when Mayer is fully ready, you can even mix in Mayer at second, too, for this year if they're both up at the same time. And then when Mayer's ready, you approach it with Devers and say, hey, listen, I know you don't want to move off third, but we're paying you for your bat. Like, let's use you at DH. And then all of a sudden now you can keep Mayer, you could keep Campbell. You got a very young team that, is cheap, but that's obviously a bonus in terms of what they can do outside of that if you have a bunch of cheap young players. But you have to consider the young guys coming up. Like, that's my biggest thing with this whole Bregman talk or this Arenado talk is I just don't think that people are so focused on spending right now in the want to spend where they disregard like really what we've built.
Yes.
And that is a very strong core of young talent that, everybody believes Christian Campbell could be a stud. What if he is in the next coming years, that right-handed bat that we really want? Like,
it would not shock
25 dingers.
Yeah. It wouldn't shock anyone if, you could argue it this season, but even a year from now, that Christian Campbell and Marcelo Meyer will already be more valuable players than potentially Alex Bregman or especially Nolan Arenado at this point, right? Like, if Nolan Arenado continues to regress the way he is, we're talking about a guy who was a league average bat last year. Like, the next step down is like hey, Josh Donaldson. Like, that's the territory you quickly fall into. And if you end up making all these pieces to kind of shake things up for a route like that, you end up looking stupid and like you kind of push the panic button. And I think when you talk infield defense, everyone wants to sit here and say it's so important to improve it. Like, you go back to the first 2 weeks of last season before Trevor Story got hurt, everyone was like, oh, wow, everything's okay now. Like, Trevor Story's out there. He looks great. Just having Trevor Story out there regularly gets the defense to a point where you are more than fine in that infield getting by. You are going to be okay. You're not going to sit there and panic. When you took him out, the entire infield defense crumbled, including, a guy at third base and Rafael Devers to have Story next to him. That goes such a long way. I don't look at it and say like infield defense, if you don't improve it by, moving Devers out of that infield, you're screwed. I don't think it's that severe because when Story came back at the end of the year to handle it, they were back to being stable out there. And you already have an outfield that's one of the elite defenders in all of baseball. You take Willier out of it, that might change the equation a bit. I do think, though, the variable with the Teoscar Hernandez stuff that is somewhat swept under the rug is if you bring him here right now, unless you can get Yoshida off the books here, he's going to be playing left field every day. And at that point, it's the same Ceddanne Rafaela conversation to me once again, where it's like, if you need to go play him in left field because you need to have Yoshida out there, at least on a regular basis against righties, I'd assume they'd let him try again to, face both sides. It's still a little bit of an awkward roster fit right now.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for me is I like Rafaela. I think he is a good talent. Mm-hmm. They obviously extended him and kind of locked him up when I kind of didn't really feel like they needed to do that. But I just don't buy into this concept he needs to be the center fielder long term. He doesn't. And he may not like it, but if we put out in a scenario, like you said, where, Teoscar's in left and we want, and Yoshida's still here, like Yoshida's still a pretty good hitter, especially against the right-handed bats. You have to just utility put Rafael as a super utility, and he'll get plenty of at-bats, whether it's at second, mixing in, giving Story, because he can play everywhere, he can mix in everywhere and give people days off, and he'll still be playing 4 or 5 days a week, but just, shuffling throughout the defense.
Yeah, and if Alex Cora, like if we're talking in this world where Roman Anthony and Christian Campbell are both potentially on the roster, call it opening day, call it 2 months into the season, we know Cora handles those platoon splits very serious. When Rafael Devers was up here, Tristan Casas, go up and down the list, those guys were protected as long as you have the flexibility on the roster. Those are other spots where, and more likely than not, those guys are going to make it clear pretty quickly, like, hey, we should be in the lineup over Ceddanne Rafaela. But those creates those opportunities, and you can give guys breathers. Guys aren't getting run into the ground as much. Like, you should have more flexibility there to do that kind of stuff. And I think with Yoshida, that's also a guy who doesn't strike out a ton. So while you're bringing in Teoscar Hernandez, who Tyler O'Neill struck out 33% of the time last year, or Teoscar Hernandez is better in that department, but you're also keeping a guy in Yoshida who's not going to K a ton, which is something your lineup is going to need.
Yeah. Now, in the future, whatever this timeline is, when you've got, say, Campbell and Meyer are knocking on the door, Matt and I talked about this 3 weeks ago when we had Jared on.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think, given his build, because Kristen Campbell is 6'3", 210, do you see him long? I know he's very, very good defensively and showed that at second base. But given his actual size, like, do you see him lasting long-term at second base? Because again, you have to figure it out, right? Like, if Mayer's more logical slot is third, because for whatever reason, they don't see him as a second baseman, which is weird to me. Like, if you can play short, you can play second, in my opinion. Like, Campbell, to me, like, build and style-wise, feels a little bit more like an outfielder. But so, like, how do you see him fitting if is the answer really second base?
I know when we interviewed Campbell down in Worcester, he told us straight out, he's like, yeah, I view myself as a second baseman, but I'm comfortable moving to these other spots. And I will say, while Campbell did appear at shortstop this past year, third base, left field, whatever it was, and he got by out there. He was fine. I don't think anyone's looking at Christian Campbell and expecting him to be a plus defender overall. Maybe at a place like second base, there's a better chance because it's lower on the scale of what he'd kind of be responsible for. But I think right now, second base seems to make the most sense. But if you told me he ended up as a left fielder, I wouldn't be shocked either. I think in this case, like, the versatility is a plus. And the fact that he doesn't really have a spot that he's kind of shoehorned into is kind of exactly what the Red Sox need right now with the log jams they have going on. But yeah, I could picture him sticking at second base, but I think in the long term, he'll end up playing significant chunks of seasons at different positions depending on what goes wrong. Probably in a way you can relate to Ceddanne Rafaela, but Campbell's just a much better player and overall prospect.
Yeah. I was only curious because I would imagine if you asked most baseball fans, they wouldn't say that a 6'3", 210-pound guy plays infield unless he's a first baseman.
Not the Dustin Pedroia build.
No,
Well,
not the
things
Pedroia
could be
build
different, 2 or 3 years from now. Like
Exactly.
we could have Mayer. Maybe, this year it's Devers at third and Campbell or maybe Mayer at second, something like that. And then next year you're moving Devers off third, and then a couple more years, Trevor Story's finally gone, and you could put either Campbell or Mayer at shortstop. Or hell, maybe you got a different prospect that's coming up and knocking on the door.
Franklin
Maybe
Arias, who knows at that point,
maybe
right?
an Arias or Mikey Romero is he had a comeback season down in, was it Single A?
Yeah, got all the way up to Double A at the very end of the year, but smoked like 16 homers and 78 games.
Maybe one of them already, and you can just keep Mayer, say, at third and Campbell at second. But I like Bregman. I would be happy if he's here, but I just have a worry of if you spend a ton of money on him, not only I think it will be a lousy contract in the back end, but it creates a even more of a log jam into. We have a ton of young prospects that are the middle infielders. Where are they going to go? And then you get stuck either having to trade them or moving them to a position where they didn't play in the minors, or they don't have a lot of experience in the minors.
And that's why I think, like, as we mentioned earlier, you circle back to Corbin Burns, and it's like, this is a guy who just slots in at the top. You're going to throw that money. You're going to give up, a comp pick for him as well. It just seems like such a natural idea. And then people will mention, like, Teoscar Hernandez. He has one too. That's why I was very into the Seiya Suzuki idea. I'm a little nervous at this point that he's not going to get moved.
I want him so bad.
But it made perfect sense. It's like 2 years, $38 million. It's even better money. A guy who, if you were on Red Sox Twitter back when he was coming over, like, dude, Red Sox Twitter had him in a Red Sox jersey. It was done because all the reports coming out of Japan was that he was going to be a Boston Red Sox. But who knows? They still have technically 3 outfielders over there between Tucker, Happ, and PCA. So, like, maybe there's a deal to work out because he's unhappy, but I don't know. I'd definitely check in if I was the Red Sox, and if you could do something like Burns and that, oh my God. Like, I don't know how you don't consider that an A off season at that point, and you're not rocking the boat in a significant way for Devers, forcing Casas out in a trade or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of balance of their team, like, we heard last offseason, it's, we're waiting for these young guys to be here. And for the numerous reasons I won't get into, that pissed me the hell off.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a balance of.
Well, I don't know where
just
he went.
Use that money.
There he goes.
Right now on the pitching, and then you have the young prospects.
Yeah,
you lost me
for a second. You're back.
Yeah,
you're back.
It was like 2 seconds.
Yeah, but like that's it. Make up for what your system isn't able to produce, right? Like you're able to produce elite position prospects. Like that's not a worry. Even at this point, your system is able to produce back end rotation arms, right? Like you have guys who are coming up that profile as that back end arm. The only guy who profiled as a mid to top was Luis Perales. And, you're hoping by the end of, 2025, he's making it back from Tommy John surgery. So like this is another way where you can kind of feed into that. And I think Alex Bregman is going to be such an incredible test for the Alex Cora, Craig Breslow relationship. Because I do believe at the end of the day, Cora and Bloom never seemingly being able to get on the same page. And, you can argue back and forth on who's to blame, whatever it may be. The truth is, you look at Major League Baseball, there's a reason Chaim Bloom's going to have a job a year from now, leading the Cardinals front office. There's a reason why people felt like Cora did not support him, maybe in proper ways. So in this situation where we know, according to Sean McAdam, Cora and Sam Kennedy want Alex Bregman, Craig Breslow doesn't. Not only is it going to show you who has the power in this, but whether those two can meet in the middle, whether they can work out a contract that makes sense. Because I think if you told Craig Breslow right now it's 7 years from Bregman, he pukes in his mouth. I think you tell that to Alex Cora, he goes, hey, man, starting next season, we got this guy in the clubhouse who I played next to Dustin Pedroia. I remember how important it was to have that kind of voice when he was growing as a rookie. Well, we're getting that guy in the middle, of his career when we kind of need him the most. Alex Core doesn't care about 7 years down the line. Craig Breslow's job is to worry about not only tomorrow, but those 7 years down the line as well. So, I think that's a major test for me on whether they're going to be able to work, because I still think while Craig Breslow, yes, he's a former player, he's much closer to the way Chaim Bloom evaluates and looks at the game. And personally, for me, I tend to lean in that camp as well. But balancing those forced marriages, those arranged marriages, that is hard, man. You do not want to get back to where you were the last couple of years where Cora is seemingly taking shots. The players are unhappy, seemingly speaking on his behalf when the roster wasn't supported. And at certain points, it was justified. And other points, I didn't think so as much. You need to be unified here, or none of this is going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, Chaim Bloom came in with a specific job. Everyone at this point knows that, and it was to rebuild from the bottom up. I am as Ben knows, a big Chaim Bloom supporter from day one.
Matt, I think me and you have shared a lot of tweets about Chaim Bloom on the timeline, right?
Exactly. And so, and the biggest thing when we talk about the balance of the team was always, he didn't draft pitching. And my answer every time, and this is where I think general knowledge of baseball comes in, is it is difficult, incredibly difficult to draft in the MLB. There are misses constantly because you're projecting guys, they're going to be in the minors for 3, 4, 5 years before they even reach the major leagues. If you have a loaded positional farm system, you can then spend on pitching. And that's exactly where we are right now. It's the exact scenario where people bitched about drafting a catcher in Kyle Teal, drafting an outfielder in Montgomery, not drafting pitcher. Well, you know what? We just got a top of the rotation pitcher for these guys. The goal is to hit on them, and then you can either use them or trade them.
That's like knowing your organization. When Chaim Bloom came here, he realized, holy shit, there's no pitching infrastructure here. People talk about where the Red Sox organization and front office was at that time. They'd become quickly outdated during the Dave Dombrowski years. And there was a lot of successes during the Dave Dombrowski years. But Chaim Bloom came here, and part of the job was, you need to get our organization to a point where we're caught up with the modern front offices like the Dodgers and these other places. How do you kind of strike that balance? And to Chaim, Chaim showed up because Dave Dombrowski wasn't willing to trade Mookie Betts at the trade deadline in 2019. Zach Scott's on record talking about this when they had a better package on the table at that time, right? Dombrowski refused to do it. Say what you will about it. That was the situation under John Henry. Chaim is then forced into a worse package that offseason when he realizes, man, do we have a farm
show?
Yeah, we don't have the farm system or the core to support it. That's why Chaim Bloom has a job right now. However, Boston radio wants to frame him or whatever it may be, Major League Baseball views him in a different way. You want to shit on Chaim for something, it's maybe keeping Dave Bush there for, 3 years and not firing that guy. Those are the mistakes, because when Jeffrey Springs was here and you couldn't get anything out of him, that's the shit that cost you badly. When Zach Littell was here and you weren't able to turn him in, those were the guys. If you were able to get what the Rays got out of those guys here, Chaim Bloom probably has an extension. Chaim Bloom's probably rocking another 3-year deal or 3 years beyond his current contract, and we're looking at a whole different vision for the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah, well, in terms of what people view of Chaim, and I think it's improved a little bit since he left. Also, is we saw Craig Breslow come in and they didn't spend in his first year here, so it makes you wonder, everyone was he's a small market GM, he doesn't know how to spend, he's afraid to spend. No, it was just ownership not allowing him to spend. And I don't want to get too caught up in Chaim Bloom,
but you talk 2023, they essentially had him at the point where he can't add any money at the trade deadline, not allowed to add a single dollar, is also dealing with Alex Cora in a dugout in a team that's ready to revolt if you start selling off parts. Imagine being the guy caught in between those and trying to make that decision at that point.
That's always been my thing, is he got brought into a straight up shit show. A crappy farm system where your best prospects were hurt. It was Bobby Dahlbeck and Michael Chavis. Where are they
Give
now?
up. Stop playing baseball.
And so, he came into a shit situation where he had a bunch of bad contracts, no farm system, no cheap young players. And he will have a what looks to be a forever footprint on this team for the next probably decade.
Yeah.
And he put the team where they are now, and they're in that scenario now where we have the loaded farm system. So I just don't buy into paying huge long-term money to a guy like Bregman for 6 or 7 years when you have this young core. Go spend on pitching and trust the young core that you built on. I bitched at Henry for firing the guy and then saying, hey, but we're going to wait for the guys that he brought here. Well, how does that add up?
Exactly.
But now that's where we are, and it's all right. So if you still trust these guys, stick with that route. Spend on Corbin Burnes, trust these young guys, and then all of a sudden, as soon as this year, but certainly 2026, 2027, like you could have these guys hitting their stride in the majors, and you could have a dominant rotation and a dominant lineup to go with it.
Like, it's crazy to think 7 years or 6 years from now, Roman Anthony's going to be 27. Like, that is bizarre. He is going to be contributing on this big league roster for what many people expect a majority of the season. He will be 27 years old that far down the line. We aren't like Roman Anthony. The best version of him is that far ahead. That's how big the window you have in front of you is if you play your cards right here. So, like, that's why I think this is an opportunity where, for Heim, like, he fucked up by at times, and Trevor's story is very unfortunate because you never could predict that injury luck, right? But, he hit a lot of bumps investing on these mid-tier talents because they didn't have the ability to go out and spend on these elite talents, right? They didn't view themselves in terms of the rebuild, in terms of selling John Henry on it to invest that kind of money. Well, now with where your build is, the state of the build is strong, as Craig Breslow has said a million times now. Don't be scared to go pay an elite talent like Corbin Burnes, who's sitting out there begging for someone to give him the bag. That's the elite talent you do it for. So don't be scared. Throw the money on the table.
And if you have reservations, right? Was it Rosenthal that had the report that he felt burned by Sale and by David Price? So don't give him a 6-year deal. Don't give him a 7-year deal. Like, be okay with like what Matt said. Give him high AAV over a 3 to 4 year contract, and then it's okay. It's a short term. Yes, it's a lot of money, but it's a short term investment to where if he really doesn't pan out, it's really only 3 years. It's not, like the Chris Sale situation. I didn't love that they gave Chris Sale 5 years and $30 million a season. We knew that wasn't going to age well.
I hated it.
And I was.
I remember texting you when that trade went down, and I said to you, "This is going to be the worst contract in Red Sox history," and it ended up. I don't know if it went that far with the Kyle Crawfords of the world, but
or
the Pablo Sandoval. But it ended up being horrible.
Yeah. I mean, I was fine on a short-term deal for Chris Sale. I would do the same thing for Burnes. Like, I get it. They don't want to spend probably $250-ish million on a 30-year-old pitcher. So go give him the short but higher AAV deal. And, in 3 years from now, Crochet is still going to be your ace, hopefully 3 years from now, and then figure out the rotation later. And then you're in the prime of the Mayers, the Campbell, and the Roman Anthony. And so, like, your lineup is what it is. And then who knows what's going to happen 3 years from now? Maybe finally Seattle decides to trade a pitcher because they don't want to spend money.
Yeah, like you can end in this perfect spot where you don't put the pressure on Garrett Crochet to be a number one these next 2 years. Corbin Burnes is that guy. As Corbin Burnes leaves his prime and is no longer that guy, Crochet elevates perfectly into that. And just like that, you're through 4 years of that Corbin Burnes contract, 5 years. And yeah, maybe the last two look like the David Price deal at the end, right? Maybe that is what it looks like. Guess what? If you win a ring over that time, nobody will give a fuck.
No one's going to give a shit if they win.
Well, and that's the balance because you need to maintain the strong farm system. And that's why, like, I get very nervous. We see the Peter Gammons report. Robert Murray had some stuff today as well that, Breslow's cooking behind the scenes, right? He's doing trade talks. He's being persistent. A lot of front offices feel that way. You don't have to empty out the farm system. You need to find the right balance. You already made a major deal from your farm system. You can spend the money and deal from prospects. If you just deal from prospects, to me, that is just as bad if you spent just ridiculous money and threw it at Alex Bregman and all these guys just to do it. You got to strike the balance. That's how the big market organizations do it best.
That's what the Dodgers do. Now, granted, they haven't won nearly as much as they probably should have over the last 5 years.
They spend Ton of money.
Yeah,
a lot more money than Red Sox.
Yeah, they go spend $1 billion and win a World Series. But I mean that's the model is if you can figure out a way to maintain the farm, you can still have prolonged success and spend a decent amount of money to fill gaps, knowing that when that player leaves, right? Like when Freddie Freeman leaves, there's gonna be somebody in the system that's gonna backfill that spot. Right, like that's just how the Dodgers are built. So if you can maintain that, like that's long-term success. You got to find like I hate to go back to like the Theo days, but like Theo did that so well in the early 2000s. And obviously, like Dombrowski was, the pendulum swung the complete opposite. And then obviously it swings way back the other way for Heim Bloom. You've got, and I don't know, maybe Theo's influence here, is where we're at right now. I know he's not calling the shots officially, but he obviously has a big time voice in that room. And so maybe we can kind of get back to that. But that's how you have prolonged success. And I'd love to see him get back to it and, be a team that can, push the Yankees, like they did. It's been too long since we've had legitimate Red Sox Yankees rivalries over the span of an entire season.
Yeah, to be sustained success, to have sustained success, you have to build from within. It's that simple. You can't always be spending thinking that that's going to work. You end up like a team like the Mets where they, threw the bag at Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, and they gave out these huge deals, and then it just not really panned out, and then they end up scrapping it. Cohen has all the money in the world apparently, so it's not the biggest deal for him, but
yeah,
it still didn't work. But yeah, we could kind of finish up on that subject. I didn't mention it to you, Tyler. I forgot to mention it. We do, Ben. We'll stay on and do a little Pats after, but
okay.
we do a state your take, hashtag state your take.
Okay.
Any take, it could be about sports. Red Sox doesn't have to be. It could be about anything in your daily life. Just something bold that you have. Ben, you want to start us off, and we'll let Tyler go last.
Yeah. So my gut one for this morning was because we haven't done a ton of Celtics. Was a Celtics one, but I got to save that one because it's not really fitting. But I'll go. My one when Jared was on, I said we would get Soto and Fried, and I was kind of over 2. So I feel like I have to. That was yeah. So for redemption, I'll say that the Red Sox next big move will be Corbin Burns. It makes too much sense. And maybe they strike a compromise where Burns is looking for 7 or 8 years. Maybe they go 4 or 5 instead. But it makes too much sense. Spend the money on the pitching. You can never have enough of it. And it certainly will take. Tyler, you hit the nail on the head. It takes that pressure off of Garrett Crochet, allows him to kind of ease into what would hopefully be an ace role for the next 7, 8, 9 years, hopefully. But it also allows we haven't talked about Lucas Giolito, year removed from Tommy John, so he's going to need to be eased in. It takes the pressure off of Brian Bayo, who doesn't need to be a de facto ace, because in my opinion, he's not. He's a ceiling of a 2, solid number 3 kind of a guy. But if you go get a guy like Corbin Burns, you're looking at, top 5 rotation in baseball, especially if you can get first half Tanner Houck for an entire season. Like, he looked unbelievable. I thought I didn't give Andrew Bailey nearly enough credit. I said that early in the preseason when we did our Sox preseason, I thought they were going to lose 100 games. Because I was like, when Giolito went down, I was like, who's going to pitch for this team? It's like we don't have guys with longevity.
Dark days, man.
But Andrew Bailey is a wizard. Certainly proved me wrong, and I think that if they go get a guy like Corbin Burns, I think they will. You're looking at a top rotation and a legitimate playoff contending powerhouse.
All right, yeah. I think we're all Red Sox Twitter will go into a frenzy if we get the breaking Jeff Passan news of Corbin Burns. Maybe he does it on Christmas. He's just saving it for Christmas gift for the Red Sox.
I think it was 2 years ago we got the first Heyman weirdly on Christmas morning about Chris Sale that he had been mentioned in some trade talks. That was the first hint we had ever got. It took another year for the deal to actually happen, but I'll never treat Christmas as a safe day again, because when that was the first signs that Chris Sale was getting shipped out of Boston.
All right, for mine, I'm going to go non-sports related. I have this debate with my now wife quite often. and it's between milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and white chocolate. Which is the best? I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. And it's that white chocolate is the superior, like Lindt chocolate style. You go in like Lindt chocolate or just straight that type of chocolate. White chocolate is so goddamn good, and people give it so much hate. I don't know why, but that's my state your take. It's that white chocolate is the superior chocolate among dark chocolate and milk chocolate.
I'm unfortunately allergic to chocolate, so I cannot relate to you in any way.
Oh.
Never had chocolate in my
God.
life. Well, when I was little, unfortunately, when they found out.
What happens if you eat it?
Throat swells like immediately. It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
full EpiPen, like save this fucking kid. He's gonna die.
Oh, jeez.
But for my take, I'm gonna go with Hunter Dobbins, a name I think many Red Sox fans are pretty familiar with at this point. Got added to the 40-man heading into this offseason to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. I think we're about to see a very, very Cutter Crawford-esque kind of rise for him. At the end of last year, he started throwing a splinker, which is, the pitch Paul Skeens has made extremely popular, and it immediately popped as one of his best pitches overall and arguably his best secondary. For that to happen over like a month span at the end of the year is pretty crazy, and he had made his way up to AAA and continued to look really good. Velocity-wise, he gets up to like 98, 99, and I could see him really factoring into like a Cutter Crawford or Nick Pivetta-like mold where you have this really strong stuff, and he has a deep arsenal. He throws a slider, a sweeper, a curveball, a splitter as well. It's kind of just a lot of different pitches. And to me, I look at Hunter Dobbins and it's a 6'2", 185, kind of like that Nick Pivetta build. I could see him really sticking around in the big leagues. And, we talk with Cutter Crawford, kind of that smaller body, why he got so run down towards the end of last year. I think Hunter Dobbins is that kind of nice sweet spot. Will he get the opportunity? It probably means something went pretty wrong. Someone blew an elbow out. Someone got hurt. But I wouldn't be surprised if Hunter Dobbins emerges as the best Red Sox pitching prospect since Brian Bayo, and, kind of formulates right into that mid-rotation tier of a lot of arms. And many people will say, do they need another one of those arms? You can never have enough. It doesn't matter if it's here or if he's shipped somewhere. That would be such a success for their pitching development program overall to have a guy like him who was an 8th-round pick in 2021 turn into this.
Yeah, it'll just further my Heim Bloom agenda too.
So. Hey, dude, I'm right there with you. Now that Elmer Rodriguez Cruz is out of here, we need someone to cling to.
Oh, dude, I liked him a lot. I was kind of upset that they moved him out, but
the velocity jump was so big coming into spring training, and I was like someone who got very excited. But they're like, it's the straightest fastball you ever seen in your life. I'm like, all right. Doesn't fit the narrative, so I'm gonna ignore it.
All right. So that's gonna do it for our Red Sox segment. Tyler, I appreciate you coming on. The Milliken militia is thriving.
It's alive and well here.
Yeah, you got any final thoughts here?
No, I'll just say thank you guys for having me on. Hopefully we can do something during the season when we have some games and different stuff to talk about. And it's always fun to sit down and talk ball. And hey, Red Sox, spend some money, please. Make us all happy. Shut up everyone on Twitter so I don't have to go on there and see the negativity every day. Makes me depressed. I don't need that in my life. But that's all, guys.
You have to recognize this is Boston sports. They could sign Corbin Burns and Alex Bregman, and they'll still find something to bitch about.
Nailed it. Yeah. All right, boys. I'll see you.
All right.
Yeah. So real quick, Tyler, final thought for you. I know they were ragging on you on Section 10. And I just want to say, don't let them bring you down. You're a rugged, good-looking guy. So hold on to that.
Thank you. I'm a cute kid. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Jared didn't want to give you props. But yeah. So keep on keeping on.
I appreciate you, boys. I'll see you later.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Tyler.
Take care. All right. So that will be. No, let's go right here.
I don't need. I just wanted to see myself in 4K high definition television.
I just want to finish up with a little bit of Patriots. Obviously, we're not going to talk a ton about it, but it's obviously in the news right now, and it's Gerard Mayo, the state in the state of his job security. I know where you stand, Ben, but let the listeners know how you feeling about this, what you think they should do versus what you feel they should do, what do you feel they will do.
Yeah, so this is conflicting because what I think they're going to do and what I want them to do are not the same thing. So and the want part of it, I'm kind of on the fence. I want to see how these last 3 weeks play out before I make a hardened decision. But there's been reports out that there's appears to be no plan to move on from Gerard Mayo. I know we've talked, off the record. I'm still in the camp that I think that if you fire Gerard Mayo now, while yes, waiting until the after next year is still a bad look. I think that only giving him 1 year it's worse than waiting, and at least giving him a second opportunity with a better roster. So I think he does stick around. I don't want to say that I want him fired, but I'm not. I haven't been impressed. They're still making some of the same mistakes here in, what are we entering, week 16, that they were making in week 1, which is something you don't want to do. You've certainly seen some player development. Drake May appears to be a guy that they can build around. There's been some key pieces. Gonzalez looks like an all-pro caliber corner. It wasn't this fluky thing last year before he got hurt. And they've been decimated with injuries. Obviously they lost Juwan Bentley. They traded away some guys, so the defense isn't quite as good as it has been. I think that structurally, it's tough. I think that not necessarily to the players' perspective, but I think that how they kind of botched the Mac Jones project, I think they're botching the coaching staff. I was of the opinion that I didn't agree with the process to hire Gerard Mayo. I really hope it works out. I didn't love that you were closing the door to guys like a Mike Vrabel or any other hotshot offensive coordinator that was coming out. But for me, if you're going to bring in a rookie head coach, you can't also bring in a rookie defensive coordinator who's never called plays, an offensive coordinator who's never called plays. And you say what you want about Alex Van Pelt. I just think that, if you're going to do that with a guy like Gerard Mayo, bring in a rookie head coach, you have to have somebody with a solid background that can be an advisor to Gerard Mayo, that not trying to figure this out on the fly. If they remain relatively uncompetitive, which is, it's not going to look good this weekend. The Bills are as good as advertised, and Josh Allen has nobody to throw the ball to, and he's probably going to win the MVP. So, I kind of want to see how they play out these last 3 weeks, before I really make a hardened decision. I don't think he will be fired, but I would say, if they don't clean things up and they're making the same mistakes and they're not competitive, it wouldn't shock me if he was fired, just because, you've got guys out there that I think could come in and make an immediate impact and turn things around. I just don't think they will, because I don't know as if Robert Kraft wants to fire a coaching staff and then hand his potential franchise quarterback in his second year, which is supposed to be the jump year, a brand new coaching staff, and essentially have to relearn an entire system in his second year in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly not ideal. The biggest thing, and so they were talking about it on 98.5 today, that kind of, they brought up a good point, is a lot of the reports about, Mayo being safe includes a current plan, stuff like that indicates that maybe they're not completely decided.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And so I personally, the way I think it's playing out is I think Robert Kraft has a soft spot for Mayo. He wants to keep him, and I think Jonathan Kraft wants to move on.
Hang him upside down by his toes.
Yeah, who will prevail in that? We'll see. But I was such a big Mayo supporter, as we talked, and we're on record on this podcast. Vrabel was my number one option, but Mayo was number two. I thought he could be a really good players coach that has a good balance. And not to necessarily say I have given up completely on him, because I haven't. I still really like the guy. And we've seen guys in year one, the team sucks and they make progress, and the team, develops and becomes better in the coming years. But this is between the on-field issues that continue to happen and the media comments that are just, it's old at this point. Like every week he's saying something that,
well, that doesn't matter.
Creates a story. Yeah. Yeah. The guy on Twitter telling me the media doesn't matter. I post a comment that Butte apologize to AVP for his comments to the media. And I'm like, all right, well, clearly it matters.
Yeah.
But, I'm sick. I'm getting sick of it. And the media comments have just kind of furthered my distaste for how things have played over the last month. And the way I think it should play out is, Robert Kraft needs to, and obviously this is not legal technically in the NFL, but Robert Kraft needs to be giving Mike Vrabel a call at the minimum and saying, like, listen, would you come here? And if Mike Vrabel says yes, I think that plays a heavy factor into the decision to keep or fire Gerard Mayo. If you know that you can get this guy, which is in my opinion a proven good football coach. Oh, and not to go off on a tangent, but for the people that tried to say Mike Vrabel is a Belichick tree guy, he's not. He played for Bill Belichick like 20 years ago. He hasn't been around Bill Belichick in 15 years. He went to Ohio State, coached there under Urban Meyer. He went to Houston, coached under Bill O'Brien. He got his own gig in Tennessee, and now he's in Cleveland for a year. He hasn't been around Belichick in 15 years. He has very little to, if not no, connection to the Belichick tree. So don't give me that bullshit. But yeah, if you're confident you can get a guy like that, I think it plays a heavy factor into the decision to keep him or not.
Yeah, and maybe I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth with this one, but I just a couple of seconds ago said I didn't love the process to hire Mayo, where they more or less promised him the gig, and that's why he stopped taking interviews and ended up ultimately signing on, and they didn't have to go through a formal head coaching search. I'd be willing to consider that for a guy like Vrabel, a guy who has the history. But big picture, like you have to entertain all options. So if you have a guy
Correct.
like Vrabel who's like, yes, I would welcome an opportunity to coach in New England. And then if they ultimately decide that, Gerard Mayo's lost the locker room and he's not making the progress to turn the franchise around and you're going to move on from Mayo, I would certainly be fine with it. With the understanding that they're going to go through a proper coaching search. I would, especially with their trajectory, this being the Lions, I would fully expect Ben Johnson to be in the coaching cycle in a couple months when the season's over.
He's the top guy.
Correct. We thought he was going to be there last year, and he felt like there was some unfinished business in Detroit. So, especially if they close the deal, and they certainly look like, one of, if not the best teams in the NFC. I know they just lost to Buffalo, but who doesn't these days? I would expect, if they get to the Super Bowl or win the Super Bowl, I would fully expect him to basically be like, I did everything I could in Detroit, and now I want to coach my own team. He comes from the same, cloth of, the Shanahan tree, which has trickled down to the Zach Taylors and the Kyle Shanahans and the Sean McVays of the world. But you got to go through a full coaching search. I would expect, guys like Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel to come out on top and be your finalists. But I would much rather them go through a full coaching search and go, okay, we knew these guys were interested. We went through the search and we found the guy who is best suited to lead the Patriots into the future. I think Vrabel has the acumen. He's a player's coach. He's still young. I think he's not that much older than Mayo. He's probably 42, 43 years old.
Probably in his mid 40s.
So you've got a guy who I have to Google it. He's 49. So my mistake. So he's 12 years older than Mayo, but he's not, he's not an old man. He's a guy that can still relate to the players, won 3 Super Bowls here. So he's got the player resume. He's done well as a coach. I don't think he ever lost to Bill Belichick after he became a head coach. I think he would be your number one choice, but I got to see a legit coaching search to make sure that the guy you want is actually the best fit for the job and not just you think he's going to be a good coach, so you have to promise him the job so he doesn't go somewhere else and then make you look like a fool for not hiring him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you got to go through the process. If Ben Johnson is interested in New England, you have to entertain that. Like, Ben Johnson might be above Mike Vrabel in terms of my, preference.
For sure, I think I would much rather have Ben Johnson over Vrabel. I just think that if you look at a guy like Ben Johnson, My gut tells me he would want to go somewhere that has like a Drake May type of quarterback, but a little bit more of an established offense where all he has to do is get the creative juices flowing and draft up schemes for talented players.
Yeah.
Whereas New England may not be at the top of his list because they've got Drake May, but it's like, but who's he throwing the ball to? And they're going to hire him before, and he's going to get the job before free agency. So the interview process pitch is going to be, if we're interviewing coaches, it's going to be, well, we're going to go out and we're going to be aggressive on a guy like T. Higgins, but there's no guarantee that he gets here. So maybe this isn't a super preferred destination for him, but I would agree he'd be my number one choice if we fire Mayo and Ben Johnson says I want to be a head coach and leaves Detroit.
Yeah, and if it is Vrabel, in my opinion, the conversations that McDaniels could follow him here. Look, like I've had some frustrations with McDaniels while he was here, in terms of creativity and stuff like that in the offense. But the good thing is we know he ain't going anywhere. And so if you bring in someone like Vrabel, he brings in McDaniels as the OC. One, you can trust that the offense will be prepared and run well. And two, McDaniels isn't going anywhere because he's not going to get a head coaching job anytime soon. So you'll have that connection with May in the long term as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to say it's likely that they fire Mayo because I think my gut still says that he will stick around. And I think that they will end up I want to say scapegoating, but in some ways scapegoating the coordinators, perhaps both of them. And if they do so, if you fire AVP, who's going to want to come here? That's the big question. Because you have to play the factor of if you're like Nick Caley, someone like Nick Caley who they wanted last year, they supposedly offered a big deal, but he decided to stay in LA. He's going to look at this and say, well, do I want to go here now? Yeah, it's got Drake May, which is better. But do I want to go here where there's a head coach that could, another bad year and he's probably out? And then there's an entire new staff. And then you're looking at 3 new coordinators for Drake May in 3 years. Or does he look at it in the sense of, if I come here and I have a great offense and the defense just sucks and we're not that good, could I then be the guy in waiting in New England? Which is an entire possibility.
Yeah,
but
like for me,
you're gonna have OCs be hesitant.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like if they do get rid of Alex Van Pelt, which I would imagine if Mayo's gone, AVP's probably gone too. I don't know if Covington would go. I think the defense is just in such disarray that it's more a personnel issue than it is a coaching issue on that side. I don't have a ton of issues on the defensive side of the ball. My issues are more like the offensive line doesn't know how to not commit a false start penalty. Things of that nature. But if they do move on from Alex Van Pelt, a guy that I wouldn't hate bringing in is Shane Waldron. I know he failed in Chicago, but he coached under Sean McVay. So if you're going to bring in a guy like a Ben Johnson as a first-time head coach who's an offensive guy, it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world to bring in a Shane Waldron who comes from the same style of offense, because I think they would gel well together. I mean, obviously we're really diving down the rabbit hole, but I would say the more likely thing is that Alex Van Pelt is not the offensive coordinator next year because they need something that's more creative. And nothing against Alex Van Pelt. And again, they don't really have the players to pull this off, but he just doesn't strike me as a super creative guy when it comes to the play calling.
No, I think he has the team prepared rather well. The offense prepared rather well, but he just maybe not the best play caller. And that's some coaches, and that's all right. That's why I brought up the idea of would he maybe stay in a sense of he gets in a new role where he's maybe a pass game coordinator and an assistant head coach, where he could stick around and have some continued connection with Drake May, but they bring in a different OC who could be more creative with the play calling. I don't want to go down that road.
We don't need to peel back. We don't need to peel back layers back.
Yeah, it obviously until it either happens or doesn't happen. I'm anticipating, still predicting that Mayo will stay on as head coach. Like you said, I think Kraft doesn't really want to admit that it could be a mistake, and he's going to want to try to give it another year to see if it can work. But I think Jonathan Kraft is pushing the other way, and I think he is getting slowly but surely more power in that room. Obviously, Robert Kraft is he's going to be in his early 80s at this point. He's moving around well. He's still, got it in his brain and the juice, and his Air Forces are carrying him around. But it's going to be a time where Jonathan Kraft has to take over the helm. And so when does that happen? When Robert Kraft isn't here, or is it going to start happening, a little bit sooner when Robert Kraft is here? Who's going to get the biggest voice in the room? So I think we both we're both on the same page here. Really, we think Mayo will be back, but we would kind of prefer if he's not.
And it wouldn't shock me if he isn't either. I just one layer of this too for me is Robert Kraft cares very, very much about his legacy. He got snubbed again for the Hall of Fame. I think that really, obviously, that matters to everybody. Whether you're a player, coach, owner, like you want to be a Hall of Famer, you want to be regarded as one of the best. And Kraft, Hall of Fame or not, it will go down as one of the best owners. He bought a franchise, and in 30 years went to 10 Super Bowls. They won 6 of them. And so, he did as much as any owner could do with his coaching staff decisions, player personnel, on down the line. And so, but I think that, I don't think Kraft wants to, ride off into the sunset with his legacy being, an aging, meddling owner who cared too much and made too many decisions to upset the apple cart. And then, in the last handful of years, in the twilight of his career, the Patriots were a bottom of the barrel team that just couldn't get back to the glory days. I don't think he wants that. And so I think that he would much rather try to keep the continuity together as much as possible because, we talked about this in the preseason. The goal was never to be a contender in 2024. It was to build a team that you could see. And Breer touched on this on Zolak and Bertrand a couple of days ago, where at this point in the season, with a team like the way the Patriots are right now, you want to see what the future could look like. And they're not there yet. Like you can see the future with Drake May. You can see Stevenson, Christian Gonzalez, like you see the progression and the future with certain individual players, but you don't see an identity offensively or defensively with the team, which is unfortunate. But I don't think that he really wants to keep this turnover going and end up with, another ruined quarterback because he couldn't figure out how to put he kept changing things and couldn't put it all together. I just don't think he wants that for his legacy. And, so I think that at least in the next handful of years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe, I still think it's going to be Robert Kraft, calling the shots over Jonathan. But you're not wrong.
Yeah.
It's going to happen sooner rather than later. I just think that Robert wants to put things, back on the right track before handing over the reins so that he can say, I helped with this and I handed over a good situation to my son. We're going back to what we were back in the early in the Brady years.
Yeah, and to finish this up on a positive idea viewpoint, the better way to put it is if they keep Mayo, like you said, his legacy and the decision to hire Mayo, he's going to need, the pressure's going to be on him. The pressure's going to be on Wolf. The pressure's going to be on Mayo to be notably better next year. Like a heavy, heavy, heavy pressure.
Yeah. Like
that should result in spending.
Yeah. They need to be a 10-win team next year. They need to spend. They need to draft well. They're going to be in prime position.
I wouldn't even say 10, but they have to be at least a 500 team, at least around 8, 9 wins. But like I said, the pressure's on. So people try to say, "Oh, we won't fire Mayo because he's cheap." He's not. That's not cheap. That's not being cheap. Come on. That's ridiculous. Worrying about a $10 million buyout because you don't want to fire the coach that's ridiculous. Yeah. I understand he hasn't been a big spender cash wise over the last decade. He was this past offseason, even though a lot of the money went to existing players. But the pressure is going to be on, and if Mayo's back, that's one positive to kind of look at. And maybe I'm just trying to look at the glass half full, point of view, but. I think that the pressure will be on tremendously to get this team back in the right direction, and that will result in some big contracts.
Let's hope.
All right. That's going to wrap this up. Wow, I'm all over the place tonight for this week. Tyler, again, thanks for coming on. It was a good Red Sox segment. Hopefully, and I said this last week, but hopefully we get some more Red Sox news when we record next week. We'll see if schedule-wise, obviously, with Christmas.
Yep. And then New Year's the week
according
after
to
that.
a lot of reports now, Bregman and Burns might not sign until after Christmas. But yeah, let's hope for some Red Sox news. Hopefully the Patriots lose by less than 30 this weekend. That will be a good thing, I guess. And Celtics are good. Bruins are iffy. Oh, I'm all over the place.
Yeah, a bonus state your bonus.
That's gonna do
your
it.
take.
So, any final words, Ben?
Yeah, bonus state your take. Peyton Pritchard, 6th man of the year.
You there?
Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me?
All right. Till next time, we'll raise the banner.
Have a good night.